Hi, I'm Charlotte Gullick, and I'm the Creative Writing Chair here at Austin Community College. We are back with another episode of Campus Spotlight, where we bring incredible guests to campus for inspiring conversations for ACC students, faculty, staff, and the Austin community. Today, we welcome Owen Egerton, who is a local Austin-based author, performer, and screenwriter. His works include the short story collection How to Best Avoid Dying, the Zach Scott-produced play The Other Side of Sleep, and several screenplays. On the film side, he wrote and directed a horror comedy for Rooster Teeth called Bloodfest back in 2018, and most recently has the feature film Mercy Black on Netflix. Egerton has been honored as one of Austin's top comics, performing with the Sinus Show and Master Pancake Theater. He's been voted Austin's favorite author by the readers of the Austin Chronicle 7 times. Owen, I'm so happy to have you here, join me today, and thank you for being here, and let's get started.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled.
Great. So we'd like to know a little bit about young Owen. Was he as energetic and creative as you are now?
I like to think I'm still young Owen.
Okay,
I don't know
sorry.
what you're implying there.
Okay.
I was a pretty goofy kid. I have two older brothers and one younger sister, so a family of four. So the older ones got their attention for being first, and then the daughter was this only daughter, so she got that attention. I was sort of stuck in the middle, and so I think I played the clown a lot. I was always doing weird things. I was sleeping in my closet for a long time because I had this idea that Santa Claus, I dressed in this outfit because I thought Santa Claus was going to come collect me and I was going to be his assistant. And then I tried to live in the woods for a while and catch Bigfoot. I would make tennis ball figure. I did a lot of weird things.
What was the outfit that you wore in the closet that might make you Santa Claus's assistant?
It was this long blue and red nightgown and like a ski cap that I found. It was a bit like Waldo was getting ready for bed, sort of thing. But for me, this was an elf outfit, and Santa Claus had sent me. It was a mess. It was a faith. Like Santa Claus was like, if I don't find you in the closet, then I'm gonna know you didn't believe enough, and I'm gonna go on to another house.
So that kind of answers my next question: is what's your first memory of taking a creative risk? Was it dressing as an elf, or does something more specific come?
That's a great question. A creative risk. It was, I think, before that. You know, my older brothers would use me as a prop in whatever shenanigans they were up to. And I think that maybe the earliest one, my brother said, you know what would be funny, Owen, is if we put you, I was maybe 3, we'll put you, less than 3, we're going to put you in a box and deliver you to Mom. And so they put me in this cardboard box and they kind of taped it up and delivered it. But the problem was it was one with these old staples inside of it. So the staples, I was in there, I was like, I gotta stay in. But the staples were scratching me up. So when my mom finally opened up the box, I kind of burst out, but I was covered in all these scratches. I'm like, hi, Mom. Which was, I think, a good horrific moment for her.
Nice.
That might have been my first creative risk of like, go with the pain. The pain's gonna work for you.
Do you think this works as an analogy as for your adult creative self, that you're going to get scraped up a little when you're doing a project?
It might. I hadn't really put it together, but I've often sort of thought pain is worth the moment. So especially on stage, I will abuse myself in horrible ways to get a laugh. I'm probably just insecure in that way. But
I'm going to go for it and
I'm
get
going
it.
to go for it. I'll fall down in my underwear as much as I can if I get a chuckle.
So my next question is, what advice do you have for your teenage creative self?
Oh, going back to my own teenage creative self.
If you could time travel, what would you say to teenage Owen about where you are now?
Right. I would say go ahead and do it. Like whatever you were thinking about or dreaming about, just go ahead and do it. I mean, I sort of think this even now when I talk to teenagers of like, the things that you're able or you're dreaming about doing, you can start doing them now, and that's how you'll learn how to do them. It took me till I was 40s to direct, and I directed my first short film then, and at some point it was someone else who said, "Why don't you direct? Why don't you do this?" And I always thought like, "No, I can't do that. Someone else does that." And I remember growing up. I grew up in a small town in Texas, and my impression was that people who wrote books were dead or lived in New York. And people who made movies were in California. They were all somewhere else. People who made music were somewhere else. No one did it here. And it took a while. I would see my dad doing cool creative acts or my mom doing stuff, but it took a while to really realize like, oh, we can do it. We can do that. So I think that would be my advice to my teenage self. Stop watching TV and go ahead and make something.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So like wherever we are is where we start with?
Yeah.
That's great.
That's much more succinctly said.
First draft, second draft.
Great.
Okay, so you dabble in a lot of genres, with horror and comedy being in the top. Can you talk about what draws you to horror? How does it explore, reveal, or comment on our social fears?
Oh, that's a great question. So, yeah, in books, funny enough, my books are sort of, literary fiction. And then I started into screenplays in comedy, but I always wanted to do horror.
Mm-hmm.
It was, again, this thing that I didn't know if I was allowed to do.
Okay.
But I do love horror. I do love how we are able to kind of collectively share a nightmare on a screen.
Mm-hmm.
And our nightmares tell us about where we are, sometimes in a more clear way, like Jordan Peele's Get Out. Like, oh yeah, I know what that's about. And other times in less clear ways, like I don't know what the social message is of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I know when I watch it with 100 people, we're all screaming together, and then also kind of laughing in relaxation afterwards. So we have this collective shared experience. And maybe it's just that the idea of like when we can nod together, like, yes, I'm also terrified of that, primarily of dying. Mm-hmm. Dying maybe when I don't deserve to, like everyone does die. That gives an intimacy and something that says something very true about what it is to be human.
Do you think comedy does the same thing, but through a different function? Or is it a shared experience? Or what do you think comedy reveals about the human experience?
George Saunders, who's a writer, he described comedy as the truth hitting you faster, which I thought was a brilliant observation. I think maybe horror does that too. Mm-hmm. And both of them, I mean, both horror and comedy have a bizarre and wonderful a trait in common in that they try to elicit an uncontrolled, audible response. Horror goes for the scream, comedy goes for the laugh. But in both cases, our body does something that we didn't intend for it to do. And when we're in public, it's even more fun when that happens. And they both have a sort of setup, surprise. One is a punchline, one's a jump scare, but they both have this sort of rhythm and expectation that is then thwarted. And I think you're right. I think comedy does do the similar thing of like, oh, this is what we have in common.
Did you initially, like you just said, there's the kind of the rhythm to both. Did it take you a while to figure that out? Did it through study or the actually trying to write it, you started to figure out that there's a pattern?
Comedy comes pretty naturally to me. Mm-hmm. Comedy, and I started thinking about it later as I was doing it a lot. Mm-hmm. And like, oh, why is this working? Like, I know that makes someone laugh, and that's what I would follow. And maybe I'm not much of a musician, but I think about Bill Evans, a jazz performer who has a quote about, I don't want to think about the academic aspect of jazz. It's a feeling. But of course, if you study his music, there is all this intricacy that's in there that he's just going with it. And for me, a little bit comedy was that way. And as I started writing more and more horror and screenplays, I started realizing, oh gosh, the similarities here are so much. And also, I mean, sometimes they are right next to each other. Mm-hmm. There can be a moment in a horror movie where we go, ah, and we scream, and then we laugh after. Or a moment in a comedy movie where, my goodness, that person just fell down really, really hard. That Charlie Chaplin is in pain. But no, it's Charlie Chaplin, so it's okay. Mm-hmm. It's comedy and horror, but they are just on the same line. It's just an easy step either way to laugh or scream.
So to shift a little bit, to think about, for you, what role does fear play in the creative process?
I love fear. So it was an interesting thing. I do a lot of shows at the Alamo Drafthouse, and for a while we were doing so many shows a weekend, and I was doing shows there, and I was doing shows, improv shows on other nights, and I stopped being scared on stage, and I realized I was losing something there. Oh. That now when I get a little nervous, stage fright, I'm like, okay, good, go ahead and use this. Go ahead and invite it in and say, all right, what's up here? And that can be a really fun energy. It also tells me if I'm scared, this is true in writing and performing, that often it means maybe I need to go in that direction. Mm-hmm. Bob Schneider, local musician and writer, a really creative mind, he talks about, I often do things I'm afraid to do. It's often the evidence that that's where I need to go. That's where I'm going to learn something and where I'm going to be challenged.
One thing about when you and Manuel Gonzalez did that reading, and he talked about when a strange idea comes, he double downs on it.
Yep.
Is that something you do? Like you've learned to embrace the strangeness? To
embrace the strangeness. I mean, I love when Manuel talks about that and doubling down and like just leaning into it. I often think about when ideas are coming to me. Like, we're here at a college, and if I was to ask a group of people here, like, hey, give me an idea about a story about a gnome, right? The first idea that someone would come up with would be good. It'd be really good because they're smart people. And then the second idea, maybe even a little bit better. And the third, maybe not as good, but still there. The fourth, it's kind of running dry a little. Fifth, kind of a bad idea. And that's when most of us stop. We kind of go, all right, look, we're running out of ideas. Let's stop here. But I kind of tend to believe you keep going through those bad ideas. The way I sort of think about it is like having a party where there's no bouncer at the door. Because there's so many ideas in the back of our head that are weird, strange ideas that will never show up at the door of a party because they know the bouncer's going to turn them away. But if you open up the door and you let in all the ideas, like, come on in. And good ideas, yeah, you show up first. Kind of bad, everyone. And then way at the back, there's this weird, freaky idea. And that weird, freaky idea is like, well, okay, if everyone's welcome, and that comes in the party, and you make eye contact with that weird, freaky idea, and you're like, that's the idea. That's a strange one. Let's start dancing.
That kid came out of that closet wearing that elf costume, and he's ready for right now. So can you talk to us a little bit about, we're an educational institution, so we'd love to hear about your educational journey. Like, what was your creative process like in school? What's your formal creative education?
I went to high school in Friendswood High School, and I had some really wonderful teachers. Actually, I do remember very much in 5th grade, a teacher saying, you're a writer. And write more stories, and meant the world to me. And then I went to the University of Texas, studied English there, which was a great opportunity. I loved being in Austin as much as I loved the campus too, but I was like, oh, Austin is a big reason I wanted to be here, because I could do stand up and explore these different cultural aspects of the city. And then I went to graduate school at Texas State in fiction, and that was also a great opportunity. All those places, the classes were wonderful. The ability to take that time was incredible. As much so was also the ability to be hanging out with other people as weirdly obsessed with stories and narrative and putting print on paper as I was.
Have you always found that listening to your ideas is honored in the classroom? Or, like, that's an interesting thing, because I teach writing, and sometimes students resist an academic situation because they think it's going to take away their creativity. And so, do you have any insight around that, or?
Well, I mean, that's always. I know so many people. I've taught a little bit, a semester here and there, but not much. And I always admire folks who do it, because there is how do you take that creativity and that wild sort of fire and say, listen, you're old enough now that you can decide how this burns, and you can craft it. I mean, every kid is a creative genius. You just watch a playground, and they're amazing. They're coming up with all these wild ideas, and that's fantastic. But not every kid is going to be a novelist, because some of them they'll put that bouncer up and push all their ideas away. That's kind of what puberty is all about. And then others of them will just never sort of take the time, how do I put discipline along with my creative instincts? I think that's a huge part of that experience of learn the craft that will feed your creativity and combine those in some way.
That's lovely. How do we feed your fire? I'm a better teacher now. Thank you.
Come on, you did it. You take my words and you put it into such good. You're a poet.
Sometimes. In the closet. So what would you say was your big break that made you able to say, yes, writing is my living, is my life? Was there, or is it an accumulation of moments?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm still waiting for it. Fingers crossed. Which is also actually probably an interesting thing, that there is this idea where what's going to make me a legitimate writer, and I find that for myself, if I'm not careful, that bar keeps moving. I'm like, well, a legitimate writer is having anything published. And then it's like, well, that wasn't published in a very impressive journal. It's having this, or having a book that sells this much, or whatever it is. All these different things. And anytime I've gotten to that place, it's kind of like when you're climbing a mountain. The peak, once you get there, feels like a false peak. You're like, oh, I could climb higher. And so I kind of have to step away from that and say, well, what makes a legitimate writer or a legitimate creative person is someone who's writing and doing creative aspects or projects. So in that way, the idea of emerging, or I want to be a writer. Then are you writing? Then you're a writer. I'm a struggling or emerging filmmaker. Come on, just be a filmmaker. Be whatever. Go ahead and claim that.
So you don't feel like a big break has come, but you're like that it's, but you're doing what you want to be doing.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've had lots of lucky breaks, you know, and there have been things like, oh gosh, you know, I got to sell a screenplay early on, and that was like, whoa, what a big break. That was a big break. Or, you know, got a novel gets picked up, like, woohoo, whatever, you know, got allowed to direct a film. Great big breaks. But it is sort of constantly of like the hustle continues.
The hustle continues. I've heard you ask people a version of this question before at the One Page Salon. So my question to you is like, would you rather have a bestseller or win the Man Booker Prize?
Yes.
Both?
Yes,
both?
I would like both of those. Gosh, man, that is so difficult. I think what I would like to do is I would love to win the Booker Prize. I mean, I think this, you know, all those, I would love that. I would love that sort of claim. And then I would love to take that, write a screenplay, make that into a film, and then
have it be, I love it. You get it all.
Get it all.
Right?
And then win an Academy Award, write a memoir about my experiences of making the film and winning the Academy Award, which becomes a bestseller. It's very complicated, but I want it all.
But it sounds clear. It sounds clear. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about your film career. Can you talk to us a bit about what it was like to be a director in Bloodfest and what that was like?
So, you know, I was writing screenplays for a number of years and doing a lot of studio rewrites, and I was working with these two other writers, Chris Moss and Russell Sharman, good friends, and we were doing a bunch of different comedy stuff. And at some point I realized I want to actually make a film myself. I want to kind of learn how to do this. So I took a couple of my short stories and I combined them into a script that I knew would be cheap. I knew that this would be an inexpensive film to make, and maybe someone would give me enough money to make something this cheap, which was my first film called Follow. So I made that back in 2015, and that sort of led to these other things, including a really wonderful opportunity of working with Bloodfest. There's a fellow there at Rooster Teeth named Ryan Hall, and he had read my stuff out in Los Angeles, and then he came to work with Rooster Teeth and invited me in. I've known Rooster Teeth for years because we kind of grew up in Austin around the same time, and I'm such a fan of what they do and how they do it, and just a tornado of creativity there. So working with them and making that film was so much fun. It was just a blast.
I think a lot of people get really interested in like, how do you get connected to Rooster Teeth? So it's interesting to know it was a previous relationship from LA.
Well, I had actually not met Ryan Hall, and he just read my scripts at some point. And then I'd known the guys, like I've known Matt and Hullum and those guys for a number of years, just because, again, we were all kind of kids in Austin, back in the 90s. So yeah, I wouldn't know how to get that in.
No, I'm not saying that, but just like they're so impressive as a company that the opportunity to work with them is really exciting and
really fun.
Can I touch you?
Yes, you can.
All
just
right.
this, not
or
this
not
one.
that. Okay.
This is the
All
special
right.
one.
Okay. So Mercy Black, an exciting new project with Jason Blum and Netflix. It's debuting later this spring, which you also wrote and directed. How did that project come about, and how is it different from your work on Bloodfest?
Sure. It actually came out.
Okay.
April, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. So I wrote a script. It was interesting enough. I know you'll relate to this. I was trying to make my first film, and it was like, oh, we're going to film it. This is a Follow, and then everything got delayed. Money pulled out. It's like, no, we can't make it now. And I was like, oh no, we'll try in the new year. And I was like, it just fell apart. And I was so distraught when a project that you put all this heart and head into falls apart. And I wrote a script in the time. I was like, well, what am I going to do? And I wrote this script. It was called The Boy at the time. And it landed on something called the Blacklist, which is a list of unproduced screenplays that Hollywood's excited about, and it landed on something called the Bloodlist, which is about horror films. And at that point, it started getting more and more attention, and that's when Blumhouse were like, we're really excited about this. And for a while, when they picked it up, and they actually picked it up and said, we want to make this movie. And I said, I'd like to direct it. And they said, well, have you directed anything? And I said, I just finished this film. And they said, well, send it to us. And I sent it to Jason Blum, and he's like, I'm watching it during lunch. And it was a rough day. I'm like, oh. And basically he came back and said, yeah, okay, you can direct this. And then for a while there was talk about it being a TV show, and they went through different incarnations and all these different aspects of what it was going to be. But finally we got to film it. We filmed it the same year we filmed Bloodfest. So basically I finished my first edit on Bloodfest, and then I immediately started doing Mercy Black. It was a crazy 6 months. And that was a wonderful experience as well. Some of the same people, really talented folks in Austin, worked with me on both films. It was a smaller set. We worked, it was a more intimate film. But just the idea of getting a chance to work with Blumhouse, I'm such big fans of what they do in the horror world. Getting a chance to work with just an incredible crew, and it was wonderful. Very, very cold. We made Bloodfest in August. I was sweating out parts of my soul. Organs were popping out of my pores. And then we made Mercy Black in December, and that was just chilling cold, and I was having children step into freezing water. I know, I'm a horrible person. It made for a good scene.
I'd like to go back for a second. So I'm imagining that you're there, and I'm thinking from a student perspective, and that someone calls and said, we'd like to make your film. I'd like to direct it. Can you talk to us a little bit about that courage, or just was it the excitement and what did it take to be able to say, someone's saying yes to you and you're saying yes, and I want something bigger.
Right. And saying, I said that to Jason Blum, who not only success makes him intimidating, but luckily I was not in the room with him because he's super tall and I'm pretty small, and he's like, hey, how are you? Kind of, fills up the room with his energy. So yeah, saying that to him was interesting. I think that the thing was, I realized that in Hollywood I was primarily known as a writer. No one was going to offer me a chance to direct unless I pushed for it. No one was asking me to, including my reps, no one was saying, go for it, go for it. And that's one of the things I think that happens a lot, I would say. Again, going back to what I would tell my teenage self, the idea that you wait your turn, I don't think that's a real healthy way of approaching creativity. I think a lot of times you just have to jump in and try and seize the opportunities that are there. And if they're not there, carve those opportunities out. So yeah, I think it was just that. I really wanted to do it. I really wanted that chance.
And no one was going to necessarily extend that offer, so you had to extend it yourself.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think that's very encouraging for students. So I want to ask you a little bit about structure, because it seems to be one of your storytelling strengths.
Thanks.
Particularly in Hollow, how you're balancing those stories, and and Michael Knoll really admires your use of structure. And so how do you think about storytelling and structure? Or is it something that's innate to your process, or?
It is now more than it used to be. When I was first writing, you kind of get lost in prose, and the stories start unfolding, which is a wonderful process and something I still really enjoy doing. I don't do that in screenwriting, though. In screenwriting, after I fill out notebooks full of ideas and everything like that, I outline my screenplay before I start typing my screenplay. Because screenplays work that way. They kind of, in some ways, they work like a song. There's a verse, and there's a chorus, and there's a bridge, and there's a verse, and there's a chorus, and boom, boom, boom. And we've almost been trained by everything we've seen to recognize some sort of story structure. So I think we have a natural ability to recognize story structure. That's why we get a weird feeling when a story ends on a strange note. And we all agree, whoa, that was a weird note. I didn't expect it to end that way. That was a clever story writer saying, I know what you're expecting. I'm going to feed what you're expecting, and then I'm going to give you something you don't expect. So for me, more and more so, working in screenplays is having a mind that is sort of gone over to structure in a way that maybe wasn't the same before. So I do think about structure quite a bit.
Do you feel like that's changed how you're writing prose?
I think so. Sometimes I have to forget it. I have to. Luckily, I hope. My hope is that my novel writing will affect my screenwriting and make me a better screenwriter, and that my screenwriting will affect my novel writing and make me a better novel writer. But they could also just sync each other. Sometimes I think it's a job of remembering and forgetting. I remember a talented novelist talked about the idea of an architect walking into a church, a cathedral, with a young student architect and saying, "What do you see?" He says, "Oh, the arches, and they're incredible, and they fill my heart with a feeling of the divine and the sense of heaven expanding outward, and says those arches are necessary to keep the ceiling up, was what the older fellow said. And the truth is, both are correct. That you have to have a mind of like, how do I keep this structure in place and working so that people can move through it and get from one end to the other? And also, how can I get lost in the feeling of awe that we find in prose? So try to do both.
One of the things you said there is it's like a job of remembering and forgetting.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
So like different moments you have to remember, different moments you have to forget, so you can get lost in the flow and then come back to the structural approach. Okay.
Yeah. I think, it is that sort of idea of just like, can I write in such a way? Can I write in such a way that I think I once put it like a drunk child. Not that children should get drunk. But the idea that you write these ideas that you've promised no one will see, that you're doing it like you're dreaming, where all the different parts of your life are kind of falling in there. Oh, like there's my gym coach. Oh, what's he doing at the church I was married in? Whatever different parts, and then ideas that are dangerous to you. Questions about my relationships, questions about my faith, offensive ideas, all these different ideas, let them get onto the page. And you can only do that, I think, if you're promising yourself no one will see this, that this is a closed door draft. And that allows you also to write horrible sentences, like, oh, this is embarrassing, but you keep going. And when all those things get on there, then later on you can invite the craftsperson in and say, okay, what of these do I love? How can I trim this sentence and make it work? What are the aspects of this offensive idea that I feel work? And put it together in that way. So I think that, and even there, in that process, you're forgetting this will ever be read, and then later on you're remembering how to craft it into something beautiful.
It makes me think about a thing I once heard when I was beginning as a writer, that there need to be 3 people involved in the process: the child, the architect, and the judge.
Ooh.
Because the child will take any risk and color outside the lines, and then the architect looks at the structure, and then the judge is evaluating. And if we invite the judge in too soon, we won't say yes to our ideas. So.
I love that. That's great. Because the judge is actually, they're all writers in that internal world, but the judge cannot do a first draft.
No.
Yeah, a horrible first draft. And the architect maybe can do it, but the child's really the best.
The child's the best. Well, kind of leads me to the next question. As someone in the community who has seen you kind of parent, I'm really admiring your parenting.
Oh, thanks.
And I would like to ask you about how does parenting intersect with your creativity?
It's funny. My kids are going to be much better creators than I am. I'm pretty sure. Like I watch them, I'm like, oh my gosh. My 11-year-old, he's always coming up with ideas for screenplays. One of them, I took and said, that's great. Can I take that? And he's like, well, okay. And the next one he came up was like, no, this one's mine. He just wild, cool ideas, and that's sort of really fun. And then my daughter is a huge fan of Broadway, and she just wants to direct. She wants to write and direct, and I love seeing that. I always thought when I first was having kids, like, oh no, this is it. I can't write as much. The hours are less. My energy is tapped. Oh my gosh, I'm going to write less. And there's possibility that I have written less, but hopefully I write deeper and better. Partially because I've never loved anything as much as I love these children. And I don't know if I've ever laughed as much as the dinner table shenanigans that we get into. So it's been a huge, I think me being in my 40s, I'm not sure what type of creative person I would be if I didn't have the constant pokes of these kids.
They are alive, right? And they keep thoughts going alive and challenging. And
and then there's also the thing too, like, so right now I do make my living writing, and so there's the times when I was in my 30s or in my 20s, I'd be like, I don't feel like writing, but I'm going to write anyway. I'm going to show up at the coffee shop. And maybe now that sort of go-get-em passion is subdued a little bit in my 40s. But now I'm like, well, do you want your kids to eat? And I do. I want my children to. I want to pay some bills, so that gets me up and gets me typing.
Yeah, nothing like a tight schedule to make you realize where the open spots are.
Yes.
To keep going.
So true. Like, oh.
So you kind of just answered that a little bit, but I know that a lot of students, the reason they take classes is because they procrastinate.
Yeah.
They can't say yes to their ideas without an external deadline.
Right.
So what is the role of procrastination play in your life? You kind of just answered it, but it's such a barrier for so many people. So if you had any insight, it would be great to hear.
Gosh, it's one of those things, you hear like, oh gosh, I just wait for inspiration to hit me. I'm like, okay, fine. That you're going to be a certain kind of writer. You might not get much done, but that's great. But if you want to be a writer that you want to do, like you want a career as a writer, then you better hunt down inspiration. You better tackle it to the ground and make it work for you. And that's probably the same with so many things. When we're young, it's like, gosh, I didn't have to have an exercise schedule when I was 20. Like I'd go play around and play football or frisbee or whatever. It was just natural. In the same way that when I had a girlfriend, I didn't have to like plan date nights or anything like that. But now as a grown up, like wait, if I better schedule some exercise if I'm going to do it. So I better make sure that's part of the schedule and put some effort into it. And I feel the same way about writing. Like writing, if you treat it like a hobby, it will only be a hobby and will only give you the rewards of a hobby. Those can be great. Those can be a wonderful release. They can be an interesting exploration of self. But if you treat it like a career or calling, maybe the calling is even more so, then it will take you in that direction. And maybe that's it for me. Like, if I were to think like writing for me feels like a calling, like a vocation more than an occupation. Because sometimes it doesn't pay at all. But for me, it's like for whatever reason, I know the world doesn't need my books, definitely doesn't need my movies. I know it's not that I'm going to make huge amounts of money doing it. These aren't the reasons I think we jump into writing. I think we jump into telling stories is because somewhere in our soul, this is what we're called to do. And this is how we work out our salvation for whatever it is. For me, that's, I think, what is at the core of my writing. And when I slip off that in other directions, which I often do, that is what I have to remind myself of. Like, why am I doing this? Because I'm called at some soul level to do this.
Thank you for listening to what you're called to do. So I'm thinking about like the student who might feel called.
Yeah.
And then they sit down, they're like, if I'm a real writer, it's just going to come easily.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how, I think that's a pretty, dangerous
Yeah.
and debilitating myth. So does
Isn't it? Oh my gosh, right? Because we read people's books. That's all we get to read. We read their books and we're like, this is incredible. Wow, Hemingway. And we don't read Hemingway's bad first draft, except some of his stories were bad first drafts, I think. But yeah, the idea that as you know, we writers, like actually we're typing away and maybe we get a bad page and after 5 hours, a page that will never see the light of day. And that process, it is something that I feel that writers need to say more often, and filmmakers, and is how very often we fail. Like, I fail all the time. I fail in front of the typewriter, or in front of the I don't have a typewriter. In front of the keyboard. I fail with stories that get rejected, or ideas, or screenplays that don't sell, and I don't talk about it on Facebook. I don't announce it on Twitter. Like, hey, guess what? Fell flat on my face with this one. That is just an important path. In fact, I would say it is the cobblestones of the road to where I want to go is failure. In fact, I would say if you're not failing, you're probably not doing it right. That you're taking, like, you can dunk as many basketballs in a 4-foot goal. I should probably not do sport analogies. But
it's a very tiny basketball game.
It's very tiny. Yes. What I'm saying is, like, if you're making every shot, make sure that the hoop goes higher. So I think, I think it really is a question of, like, well, like Manuel would say, even double down on a bad idea, lean into failing. Like, put yourself down and write. Make sure, go ahead and do, like, it's going to be 3 pages a day or whatever, set your goals and do it. And don't be afraid of bad writing. Go ahead and do the bad writing, because behind that bad writing A few drafts in is something great, but you can't get there without going through that path. You just can't.
So you've kind of already answered this, but I just want to open it up. Is there any other myth about being a writer that you would like to, right here, right now, debunk?
Dispel.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Myths that I thought. I was like, I thought that writers made money.
Okay, good one to clear up right here.
I think there is. I mean, I've been able to have a career as a writer, but that is a difficult aspect. Like, it's a difficult career as far as that. Drinking and writers. I think this is a huge thing, that if you're going to be a writer, you have to be drunk. Or even the false quote, that is attributed to Hemingway that he never said of write drunk, edit sober. Not true. Like, drinking does not make you a better writer.
And it's not very sustainable.
Sure isn't. Yeah, it really. Yeah, I mean, I think actually, I would also say I think the internet is almost as dangerous as whiskey, and whiskey is pretty dangerous too. I think like those two things are huge barriers to young writers and older writers too. But young writers, I think because with alcohol, you're like, yeah, it makes me feel like I'm a writer because I'm drinking and talking about writing. Like, that's not writing. It's okay to do it every so often, for sure, but it's not writing. And then the internet, I think is a wild thing. If we're writing all those ideas that we're talking about, we're not afraid to have bad ideas, weird ideas, offensive ideas, personal ideas. If we really want to get all that onto the page, then you're basically writing in a spiritual sense naked, right? You're naked. Now, the weird thing about that is these days, so much of the writing that we do and the reading that we do is very public. We're standing on a stage that is possibly the world. We have 1,000 friends, and those friends have 1,000 friends. We know that we're on the precipice of any sentence that we put online could go viral and everyone would see it. So if you get in that mindset, even for a moment where you just naturally know, Twitter's open, Facebook, whatever it is, this idea could possibly immediately go to everyone in the world. You are dressed and you've got sweaters on, you're clothed in every kind of way, and you are careful. It's impossible to kind of go from naked to dressed without taking a lot of time to undress. So put that away. It is a game of ping pong. I say it's a game of ping pong because you hit a ball and you're waiting for the ball to come back, and you're going back and forth like, oh, like my comment or reply to it or something like that, and you're clothed and you're careful. Put that away so you can play the solo game alone, naked, which is finding those stories that we need to be told.
And that's the only thing you can control.
Yeah.
Is whether, and if you're waiting for the external,
yes,
it's not gonna. Yeah.
It's not, yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're waiting for the external.
So you do a lot in the Austin community, I think you give a lot to the creative community. And so, like, can you talk a little bit about that? Like,
yeah.
What are your motivations?
Yeah.
I just see you as a very generous, creative community member.
Well, thanks. I mentioned to you earlier that it was all selfish, and it's not exactly a lie. So I host this thing called One Page Salon, for example, which is at the North Door, and it's the first Tuesday of every month. And we have some writers who are published in New York Times bestsellers, and some writers who have never published a word and never read in front of anyone. Sometimes it's singer-songwriters or filmmakers, and they all present either a page or a sample of film or song, all about a page worth of one page in progress. And it's great. It's a really casual, fun scene. I started doing that. I've been doing it for years now, but it's because I wanted to hang out with writers. I really like hanging out with writers. I like talking about books that we love. I love talking about stories that we love. And so that's something I really enjoy doing. So when I end up hanging out with other writers in some ways, it's kind of selfish. It feeds me to be in that environment of people being excited about narrative, excited about stories. So I think, hopefully other people get stuff out of that, but that's what I get out of it.
Well, I think a lot of people get stuff out of it, but it's also another way of overcoming a myth is that we don't need community.
Right.
You build a lot of community and you bring people together, and I think that is, it feeds one's soul. I think
it
to
does.
do that.
Well, I'm sure in your classrooms you experience that too. Like there is, you take a lump of coal and you take it out of the fire and it can glow for a while, but pretty soon it starts to just turn to charcoal. But you put it in there again for a while, and it just burns. That heat just gets shared and makes this big heat. And then the coal can go back to its private little hole and has enough glow to write a little bit, and then needs to come back and get some more of that. So I feed off community myself, and yeah, I think it's a big part of writing. It's that weird thing of like forgetting and remembering. Mm-hmm. You need both. I think you need community and support, and then you need solitude, silence, and the ability to not care what anyone else thinks. If you can have both those things, that can be a good part of writing.
So another way that you build community and seem to have a great time is with Master Pancake. And so how did you start that, and was it your idea?
No, I mean, the way it started was, this was back in the late 90s, and I was doing a lot of improv comedy. I was doing music shows as well with a fellow named Jerm Pollitt, really wonderful improv and rock star guy, really cool guy. And then Tim League, owner of the Alamo Drafthouse, Tim and Carrie League, they said, Mystery Science Theater used to be on television. It was really fun. It'd be fun if we did our own version of that in some way. So he had seen Jerm in some film and tapped Jerm. Jerm said, well, Owen, you come do this. And we knew John Erler. And so the three of us started doing it, called the Sinus Show back then. And we just started doing the show. We'd make fun of movies. And the first one we did was like this weird movie called Nude on the Moon. And we worked really hard to make all these jokes, and we had a little skit. And Tim had put it in the paper, the Chronicle, and said, we're doing Nude on the Moon, and if you show up naked, you get in free. And he put that as a joke. And then that night, 100 people, which we filled out the place, we had to turn people away, but 100 people were naked. Like a lot of naked people at the Alamo Drafthouse. And we're like, what? And it just sort of took off from there. It's been a lot of fun. We just did some shows. John and I just did the Christmas shows. Now it's called Master Pancake, and we're just talking about how we've been doing this close. This will be our 20th year. We started it in 2000, so this will be our 20th year.
Are you guys still scripting jokes ahead of time, or is it all?
We do. We write the show. And then, but every so often we do a show where we let the audience bring in whatever movies, mm-hmm. and they just sort of do a pitch. Like they get a minute to do a pitch. Like, this is why we should make fun of this movie tonight. And that's great. And then we do that one. We don't have any jokes written for that. We just improv it, which is really fun, except when they bring one of my movies. Then it's a little difficult.
That's awesome. Okay, kind of related, kind of not. So how would you say that faith plays a role in your creative process?
Oh, wow. That's a very good question. It is something that it comes up again and again when I'm writing. And I don't exactly know why. Again, mm-hmm. I think it's just that process when I let things go. Concepts of faith fall out. Mm-hmm. Partially because of my own history. When I was a teenager, I had this very big religious conversion. My family wasn't necessarily religious. My grandfather was, Church of England minister, but my family wasn't. But I was like, oh my gosh, this is everything. And I was, this is what I want to do with my life, is follow God, follow Jesus, be a part of that. And then in my later 20s, I moved away from that. I became actually a little, not just a dislike, just a little disgusted sometimes mm-hmm. with the community of people in faith that I was around, and disturbed by some of the things I was seeing. And I've always now returned to those questions. I think sometimes we think of life as defined, and we are defined by the answers that we find, but I'm more and more convinced that we're defined by the questions we return to. So my answers have changed in my life so many times, but often the question is the one I keep going back to. Like, what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be in community with humans? And what does it mean at the core of our being, of what we are? And those questions come again and again and again. Faith, I think, is this wild human ability. I think it's like a superpower, or maybe it's like a sense. We understand touch to some degree, and sight and hearing, but we have this idea or ability to believe things that either we're not sure are true or not, or even sometimes we have the ability to believe things we know are not true. Mm-hmm. We do this when we're watching a film, and we start to cry. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm crying I'm afraid for this character. It's Meryl Streep. She's fine. She's going to be okay. But we are choosing to believe in the narrative presented to us, and that's a wild ability. So I think our ability of faith is something that we're only just beginning to explore as human beings. I think it's, as any power, can be something that's incredible and empowering, and also could be something devastating and dangerous.
Do you feel like when you're in the creative process that you have faith in it?
That is a great question. As you know, in writing, you hit walls again and again and again, and you just plow into something. It's like, oh my gosh, there's no way out. This book is doomed. The screenplay won't work. It won't come together. And then I do remind myself, like, you know what? It will. It will. Just keep going there, and it will. The answer is so often in the writing, which is something I have to remind myself again and again. Like, I think. I'm like, why don't you just sit down and type or scribble? Because the answer's there. It's just waiting. It's hiding behind some things. Sometimes I think about this. My friend Russell and I, who's a great filmmaker as well as a screenwriter, he and I would talk about like a screenplay we were working on at a point, and I basically painted a character into a corner. And he's like, we can't do this situation because we have no idea how to get him out. And I said, but that's what we do. That's what we do in stories. Now, we can take the time. When someone's watching this, they're just going to watch it minute by minute. But we can take days to work and sketch and think and brainstorm about how he's going to get out of that painted corner. And so I think I like to see my characters get painted in a corner, because when they're there, when they're trapped, when everything's against them, that's when they learn they can fly. And hopefully I'm doing that with my own life on a creative aspect. Like, I'm going to try and do something I've never done before. Throw myself into directing a film. I didn't have any training for that. Or whatever it is, like try and write a story. Like, I don't know how this is going to go, but I have faith that if I throw myself in, I'll learn how to swim. Not by looking at the water, not by thinking about it, not by threading about it, but by jumping in. And so, yeah, I suppose there is a faith that the creative process will eventually sow the wings that I need to fly out of that corner.
It's great. Then thinking, yeah, sure, I can direct. Oh, now I'm in a corner. I better be able to do this.
Terrifying.
Okay, so I'm hearing from you that like you define success as being someone who is living, breathing, writing, contributing.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's this other level where you've won the Pulitzer, the Man Booker, and it's been turned into a film, and then they make a film about that.
Yeah.
Okay, you're with Terry Gross on Fresh Air.
This is better than Terry Gross.
Okay, what's the one question you always want to be asked in an interview?
What is the one question I want to be asked in an interview? Gosh, what a great question. I want maybe to that question. I want to be asked, what is the one question? And we just go in a circle.
Oh, okay.
I think maybe there's probably two. It would be what burns inside you, and maybe the other one, and this just comes to mind, like, what do you believe? I don't necessarily know that I have an answer, and maybe that's why I'm kind of moved by those questions. I enjoy the questions that I don't have an answer for. This is true, I think, in my living, but definitely true in my writing. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I find if I'm writing a story or a chapter, and I know what I'm writing about specifically, like I know the answer that I'm trying to get the audience to, like, you're going to realize by the end of this story that racism is bad, and I'm going to show it to you. Then I write a stale story, as opposed to getting into a story where I don't know the answer, and I don't yet figure it out. So I haven't got to figure it out. And that way, I feel I'm discovering in the same way that I'm hoping a reader would discover. And sometimes I don't like the answer, or I'm wrestling with the answer as well. When writing Hollow, that there was a lot of that. Like, I'm trying to ask the question of, like, what beats at the heart of humanity? What beats at the heart, not of just humanity, but existence? Like, and that's a hard thing. Like, what does it mean that horrible things can happen in such a beautiful world? And so I think those are the type of questions that I don't have answers for. So yeah, that's a long answer for really succinct questions.
Okay, great. So what advice would you have for an ACC student who's interested in pursuing a career in writing? So I've heard, like, follow what burns inside you.
Yes.
And then what other practical things?
Okay, so for writing specifically, I would say it's writing. And I know people talk about that a lot, of like, write, but and I think there's time for sitting, time for waiting, but if you're reading and writing quite a bit, then you are on that path, and that's what you should be doing. And then I would say, as much as you're writing, also be submitting. Submit to those journals that you love. Check them out and submit to them, or even journals that you don't love. And celebrate every rejection email you get. In fact, go ahead and print it out and tape it to a wall, because it's evidence that you're in the game. Because people who don't get rejection letters are the people who are not in the game. It's like if you struck out, that's evidence that you're playing baseball. That's another sports, and I'm a pretty sporty guy. I know. So that would be my advice there. In film, I would say, be doing it. Like the camera in my phone is a better camera than what I filmed my first feature on. If you have a screenplay, I guarantee you know someone who wants to act in a movie. And if you're an actor, I guarantee you know someone who has a screenplay. If you have a screenplay and don't have a director, I guarantee you know someone who wants to direct, who's looking for a screenplay. And you're a director, I guarantee you know someone who has a camera who would love to be the DP. You can find those groups together. You should be making films on the weekend. Doing it is a great way to learn how to do it.
So for film students, it's doing it, but also being connected,
Sure.
right? And taking the risk of, what are you creatively interested in? How can we collaborate? And taking the risk to find the connection.
Yeah, so much so. Sometimes people ask, you were like asking, like, how did you, connect with Rooster Teeth or everything like that? Like, how did you break into film? I was like, gosh, that's such a weird question. I don't even know how I kind of slid into, film stuff. But actually, I do know, and it has less to do with me in some ways. Back in the 90s, living in Austin, there's a bunch of people, same age, doing all kinds of creative stuff. And some group of friends, Chris Moss and Mike Akel, were making movies. And they were making them on the weekends, and making them with less money. They were getting friends to do the acting, friends to do all these different parts of it, and they were really fun. I knew them, they knew me. We were part of the same community of creatives and encouraging each other to do stuff, to just do stuff without an aim for success necessarily as far as financial. And so we were all helping each other out. That movie for them ended up getting national distribution, ended up getting them agents and representation. And then later on, when Russell and I are working on a script, because he came to me and said, let's have fun with the script, and we're playing together, then we said, well, let's take it to these guys. They know what they're doing. And Chris Moss came on, and that's how we got a script to Hollywood. And what was amazing about those two guys is I've been to LA. There's a bunch of people, not quite just figuratively, sometimes literally, like outside the studio gates, like begging to be let in, waving screenplays. But Mike and Chris did this thing where they just built a pole and just said, we're just going to pole vault in, And I think that's a great way of making things happen in film, of like getting together with your community, making sure that you're looking out for each other, and pole vaulting all the gatekeepers. I say the same thing in writing. Keep writing. Don't be waiting for someone to give you permission. I'm always waiting for that. So I remember asking a professor when I was an undergrad, like, do you think I have what it takes? And he's like, I can't answer that question for you. And I was like, why can't you? Someone tell me it's okay that I can be a writer. But I can be a writer by writing words.
You have to say yes to yourself.
Yes. You did it so well. We should do a podcast.
I'd love it. How can people find out more about what you have going on? What's your presence online? What projects you have?
Yeah.
So how can they find out more?
Let's see. I have a webpage, owenegerton.com. It's sometimes up to date. It's often not. And I'm on Facebook at Owen Egerton, and then I'm on Twitter. I like Twitter at Owen_Egerton, Egerton. And like I was mentioning before, I spend too much time there. I was like, I got to get out of there. But that is a fun place to kind of joke around with folks doing what you're doing.
I also encourage folks to go to One Page Salon or Master Pancake, because to go and see you in person and see how you bring people alive in the process is really great.
Thanks.
Too.
I appreciate you saying that.
I'd like to thank my guest, writer, director, and novelist Owen Egerton, for being on the show today. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in next time for another episode of Campus Spotlight.